Okay, I have started the recording. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so today's training is going to be the admin training session. This training session covers the admin feature for you to manage the account once you go live. And so only those users that have access to manage the entire system or are admin users, this training is for them. So when you first log into your BidSync account, it will take you to your home screen. Your home screen gives you some details about things that might be happening on the account. So if there's workflows that you need to approve as an admin user or as a workflow approver, that link will be here. And I'll show you that a little bit in depth once we get to that part. Other things that you would see here is anything pertaining to your user. So if there are solicitations that you are managing and there's questions that vendors have responded or asked on a solicitation, that would show up here on the home page as well. You can also view any bids here that are about to end for your organization. So if you're wanting to kind of get an idea of what solicitations are out, this is a great way to see those on your home page. So bids about to end. The Tools tab in the Admin section is what we will be covering today. And this is what houses all of your information in the tool. So everything that's been implemented this far has been inputted through the Admin tool. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the General Information tab. This section is the user. So in this case, Fran. Fran came in and registered an account. And this is the information that she registered with. This is also the information that our support team is seeing on your account as your main organization information. So if your city name ever changes, if your address ever changes, this is where you'll need to update that information. Also your homepage, you can update that here. It's just a matter of clicking in the box and then making the edits here and submitting once you're done. Now, right now we're showing that Fran is the main user on the account. But if Fran ever leaves or if this main contact needs to change, you can select search. This search box will come up for you to enter in a name, and it will bring up any user on your account that meets that name that you've entered in. Or as you can see, I haven't done a search, so it's showing everybody. So if Claudia needed to be the new main contact, you would just select her name. And when you select her, she will now show up as the main contact. So that's how you can change the main contact on your account. Is there any questions with that?
No.
Okay. We set up your account to be formed in departments. And what you're seeing here is a list of departments that you provided us during implementation. So these are all the departments in your account. Departments are connected to users, and those users have the ability to release solicitations on behalf of their department. If you're an admin user, you can release a solicitation for all of these departments. And so you do have that access level as an admin user. There will be a separate training on how to create a solicitation and manage a solicitation. But for the purpose of setting up your account in departments, this is where you would manage the department setting. If one of your department's addresses change or information changes, you can select edit. The edit feature will take you into the department name, the abbreviation for the department, and then it will list the users here. If you need to remove a user from a department, you'll just select remove next to their name. If you need to add a user to a department, you will select add new user. You'll search for that user in the tool, select find, and then you can add them directly here. So this is where you'll manage the departments and the users that are associated to those departments. If you ever need to remove a department, you can delete it here. However, if you have users tied to this department, you will get an error. So you'll first have to remove all the users and then delete the department. If you make any changes, just make sure to hit save so those changes have been saved. If you need to add a new department to the system, I think I might be frozen. Give it a second. If we need to add departments to the account, there is a way to do that. So if you ever have to add a department, you still can. It's not something that you have to go through your support representative for, even though your support representative could help you. But right here, back on that main department page, you can select new department, and it looks similar to what we've just set up. So you'll create the department name, the department abbreviation, usually the department required prefix. I just copy the department name into this area and select save. Once you select save, you'll then be able to add in users the same way that you were able to add them in the edit mode. Is there any questions pertaining to how to add departments in your account or how to manage the departments and users tied to those departments?
I do have a quick question. When you demonstrated removing the user from the department before you deleted the department, it doesn't remove the user from the system, does it?
No, it doesn't remove them from the system. This is only managing the department. So it's removing them from the department that they're tied to. Okay. They're still a user in the tool.
My second question was, when you opened this section and talked about department security, you talked about, these would be the only people that could release or do things in a particular department, maybe not release, wrong word there. But what did we do to set up our agents like Robert and Keith so that they could release on several departments?
So Robert, for instance, we'd have to look at his user permission, which we can do once we get to that point.
Okay.
But Robert would have to have the, basically the ability to be kind of like an admin user to create solicitations for multiple departments. So if you have users that need to create on behalf of multiple departments, then that's where we'll have to play around with their permissions so that they have that access. Because if they're just a regular standard department user, so for instance, Christian can only create and release if he had those permissions on behalf of this department. If he has admin rights to be able to edit and manage for all departments, then he would have that access level. So if you have users that are tied to a department that they need to release on behalf of many departments, then that's where we'll have to play around with their permission roles. So that's something that we'll start figuring out during the testing period. So after we do the end user training session for creating solicitations and managing solicitations, if there's users that can't create for other departments that they need to, then we'll have to look at their permissions and adjust them. But right now, the system's only set up so that one user is tied to one department. One user can't be tied to multiple departments. And so that's where we have to play around with their permissions to adjust that. Is there any other questions?
Yeah, I have a follow-up to kind of what Andrea is talking about. By removing the person within the department, it still does not remove their archived history or anything like that of activity, correct?
Correct. So we will talk about that once we get to the user section, which is next. This is just on a department level. So this is just saying this user's in the system and they're tied to this department. Do we want to untie them from this department? Yes or no. It's not saying, do we want to remove this user from the entire system and all of their history? It's just for this department.
Okay. Perfect.
Yes. If you are under departments, this remove only removes them from the department. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Let's move on to the user section. This is the section of the system that manages all the users, their access rights. This is where you could remove a user from the system. And so we'll want to talk about this a little bit more. So up top, you have a search bar. You can search for the user by their username, which is their email address, is how we've set it up in the system. You can search their email address, first and last name. You can select by department. And you can also select by their roles. And remember, these are the roles that we set up during implementation. And so this is where we tied users to those specific permissions that they would have access to. Down below is a list of your users. There's a number string to go throughout different pages, and then you can have a result. So how many users do you want to display on one page? So let's just look at the first user, Richard Ash. We can see his username, his email address on this page. We can see that his status is green, meaning he is an active user in the system, so he has not been suspended. If we're looking down, we can see that Claudia has a star next to her status. That star indicates that she is an admin user. And so this is one way to quickly identify who the admin users are on your account. The approval details, that goes into the workflows and what approval levels the user has access to. So here for Richard, we could basically delegate if he's a workflow approver and he was going to be out. This is where he could either come in and delegate for his user, or as an admin user, you can set that up to delegate on behalf of him. So if you know that Richard's going to be out for a week on vacation, you can come in and you can search for the user that needs to take over his role until he's back. So you would search for the user, you would select the user, and then you would give them a date for how long they're going to be taking over his role, and then select delegate. So this is great, a great feature to use if you know that specific users are going to be out of the office. Now, on a user level, each user has the permission to delegate their own user if they need to, but as an admin, you could come in and set this up for any user. So you have the delegation options for the bid release approval, for the bid award approval, and there's different levels within that. So something to keep in mind is read the headings before you set up a delegation. So the temporary bid release workflow delegation is a temporary period, so it's for a certain amount of time. If Richard is no longer with the organization, you can permanently delegate his user with another user so that they can take over his workflow ongoing. So this is a way that if Richard leaves and he has a replacement come in, this is an easy way to just replace his replacement with all of the roles or approval workflows that he was involved in. So we know that Richard's not a workflow approver in our case, but if he was, this is where you would come in and set up those delegations, or set it up to permanently delegate his workflow to another user. If Richard was in a approval group, so I think we had a case where Fran and Leah were in a group and either one of them could approve. There is a way to add them to a release group, so one of those approval groups. So you could do that here as well. You also have those same functionality for the bid award workflow. It's the same thing. There's a temporary bid award, a permanent bid award, and to add them to a bid award approval group. Be careful with reading this because, again, if you permanently adjust the workflow, there's no way to undo it. You'd have to go back and then add Richard back in to his workflow groups if you've completely removed him by doing the permanent bid award workflow. The temporary one is what I see used most when users are on vacation, because you can set a date, and the nice thing is once this date hits, it automatically turns everything back to normal. So when this date hits, whoever was the designation for Richard would then be cut off, and Richard would be able to resume as normal. Are there any questions about this screen?
For the permanent workflow section, Is there any way to lock that down or password protect or anything like that?
Not that I know of, but I can look into it for you. I'll take that down as a question.
Okay. I mean, it's not important. I was just wondering if it was just as easy as a radio button to lock it.
Yeah, there's not a way right now to lock it.
Okay,
so
fine.
as an admin user, you just have to be careful when you're in this section.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Now, sometimes you'll notice on the screen, and this is something to keep in mind because it can become confusing, but sometimes you'll notice that if you go back to tools, you don't see the admin section that we were just in. So if you ever get to a page where that happens, just select tools again, and then tools and admin, and it will take you back to the admin screen where we were under the user setting. Let's go back in there. So we were just looking at these, my browser is saving my address in there. But we were just looking at these approval details. So each user has those approval details. So if you had to, for instance, if Claudia was gone, you would search for Claudia's user in the system. And then when she pulls up, you would be able to come to her approval details and then delegate for a time period if she's out for her workflow. So it's per user. Every user has this action section where you can edit, delete, copy, or look at their permissions. So the first thing we'll look on the list is edit. This edit section is where you can manage the user's permission, the user's main information. So this is really where you can manage that user's data. So as we're looking at the user, here's where we can see what their username is and their email address. So if a user has forgotten their username, you can come into their user and see it here. You could also change their username here if you needed to as an admin user. You can change the email preference. Everything's set to HTML for all users. You can change that if you needed to. And then there's some times where you will put in an email address and the system won't recognize it as a valid email address. So if you select this box, that will indicate that, yes, this is a valid email address and the user can receive email notifications. This is where you'll manage the user's first name and last name. So if you're noticing a user's name is spelled wrong, this is where you can come in, you can delete it, and then retype in the information. If you wanted to hold a job title for each user, you could add the job title in here. And then this is also a location where you can identify what department this user belongs to. So the department location is one area where you can connect a user to a department. You can also connect them on this level under the user section. So you would just select the department that the user belongs to. You can identify the user's phone number, address, city, region, and zip code. I always try to make sure that this box is selected if the user is an approver in a workflow, because this will immediately send them a notification once a workflow is waiting for them to approve. Also within here is the permission role that the user is tied to. So in this case, Claudia, is that who we're under? Is tied to the permission role functional admin. If you remember, these are the roles that we set up during implementation. And this identifies what permissions are attached to that role that she has. Now, if you need to make edits to the permissions, you have to select edit permission role. So right now you can see, like, I can't type into it to make any adjustments like I could up here with her user. So you'll have to select the edit user permission role, which will then make it so that these are now available for me to select and change. So the agent, the functional admin is the role, and the permissions are listed below. So if you ever decide that Claudia needs to start managing qualifications to approve qualifications, receive the qualifications notifications, you can come in and set up that information. So you can still make adjustments to the permissions. One thing that you don't have the ability to make adjustments to is to the permissions tied to this role. So if I select this, it brings up the permissions tied to that role. If you ever need to make adjustments to the permissions tied to a role, that will have to be done by your support representative once you go live. So this is something that you as an admin don't have the ability to adjust, is the permissions attached to each role. However, you could come in and select a box and give those permissions to Claudia if you needed to. Okay. Frozen again. But you have that access for the general, which is usually the admin functionality, and the source, which is usually things like creating a bid, releasing a bid, managing a bid. So things of that nature when it comes to source. There's also that for the contract section. So creating a contract, managing a contract. See if this is going to work for us. Okay, moving over into a sales mode to see if we can get that to work.
Shannon, I do have a question.
Yeah.
If a user forgets their password, you just mentioned, yes, they could call us and we could look in their profile and find it. Is there also like a reset button that they can request, like forgot password?
Yep. So when they log in for the first time, when they select login in the tool, it will say forgot your password, click here. Forgot your username, click here. So they have the ability to manage that as well and to send an email notification to themselves to either reset their username or reset their password. They could also call into our support department, and support could also give that information to them or reset their password for them.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So we were looking under edit. And so underneath edit is where we were looking at the user's details. Let it load back in there so you can just see the rest of it. If you do make any changes and submit, the system does require you at the bottom to enter in your user or your password for the save changes. So I'm logged in as this user right now with a password, and the system does require you to put in a password to validate that you're making the changes. Now your user, everything that you do is documented in the history section. So you do have to come in and put your password in and hit save. The system will validate that you have the rights to make those changes. And if you do, then it will go ahead and save the changes. That history of what you've just done and changed is documented in a history. If the user was tied to any workflow groups, you would see that here. And then all the bid types that are listed in your account. This is a sales environment, so this looks a little bit different than what you might have. But all the bid types that are available on your account would be listed here. And you can come in and select what bid types this user should have access to. You also can determine what bid response model type. So if you remember in one of our demos, there were 3 different bid response models. There was an electronic response, which means everything is done through the system. The solicitation's created in the system. Vendors respond through the system. You award through the system. There's the paper response method, which is the user can just kind of create the bid packet for the vendor to download electronically, but then the vendor has to submit their offer offline. After the solicitation closes, a tabulation is not generated through the tool. So you can't come in and put in the responses like you can with the paper response with an electronic tabulation. So if you want to stop your users from being able to access these different response models, this is where you can do it on a user level. You can also identify what status the user is in. So are they an active user? Maybe they're suspended, or maybe their password, they've reset their password, and in that case, you would see that they're required to change it on their next login. If you needed to reset their password for them, you could do that here by creating the password, verifying the password. Again, any change to be saved would require you to put in your password and hit save. As we mentioned, the user does have on their level the ability to change their own username or password. If they have forgotten it, they can do the reset password or reset username when they log into the system, or they could call to support. Any ways that they can get that reset for them, but this is one way as an admin user that you can manage it. Once you've put your password in and hit save, it would save any changes for that user. So remember, this is on a user by user level. It's not changing it for all users, so you need to make sure that you've selected the appropriate user on the account to make the change to. So we just talked about the edit. Is there any questions about editing a user's information? Okay. The next thing we want to talk about is deleting. I don't recommend deleting a user, because if you delete a user here, you delete that user's history. So what I actually recommend doing is coming to edit and selecting suspend at the bottom of that status section. If you remember seeing that page where it said active, suspend, or require them to change their password, I actually recommend doing that is to suspend the user. That way, all of the users' data that they have performed in the system, so their history of what they have done, is still saved and can be accessed. If you delete a user, you delete their entire history. It's as if they didn't exist. So again, I recommend never deleting a user, but instead coming in and selecting edit and then suspending their user. Their box will change from green to red if they're suspended. If you ever see a yellow box or a yellow circle, that indicates that that user is, they're still a user, but they haven't come in and logged into the system to validate their user. So they're kind of in a limbo stage, like a pending stage. But if they're red, that means that they have been suspended. They do not have any access to the system. You've cut off their access. They cannot log in or view anything. So again, that's why I recommend you do edit and suspend. However, if you need to delete a user, you can. You'll select delete. What will happen is a box will come up and say, you've requested to delete this user. Do you want to remove the user from all active workflows? Or do you want to select a replacement user? And in that case, you would search for a user to replace the deleted user with. Once you've made your changes, again, you have to put in your password. So things are password protective here. You can't just delete and the user's magically gone. You have to put in your password and confirm deletion. You won't even have access to see this if you're not an admin user for managing users, but if somehow a user was able to get through this, but they didn't have the ability to delete a user, when they put their password in and hit confirm deletion, the system would say, you don't have the rights to do this, and would stop everything. The only time I would really delete a user is if we've entered a user into the system and that user has done nothing in the tool. And in that case, we could go ahead and delete them because there's nothing tied to their user. But just to clarify, I suggest selecting edit and suspend if you're wanting to have a user not be able to access anything in the tool. Is there any questions on deleting?
No.
Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about is copying a user. So if you have a user and a new user starts working with City of Tallahassee, and you want to just copy over a user that already has the same permissions, roles, functionality that you want your new user to have. So instead of creating that user from scratch, you can come in and select copy. when you do that, it will take you into that user format that we saw earlier, where you can add in their general information. So you'll put in all their general information, but then if you scroll down, you'll notice it copied over the same permissions that the user I copied already had. If you needed to make changes, you could. You would just edit the user's permission, and if that user was tied to any workflow groups, you could see here. It would also copy over any bid types and bid response models that that copy user had. So it's a quick way to create a new user instead of doing it from scratch. Again, you do have to put in your password and hit save to save that user. If you do not, if you just cancel out, you didn't create the user, even though you came to this page. So you always want to make sure to put your password in and save. So the copying is a way to create a new user by copying another user. So keep in mind what user you're copying over. If I'm just looking for a standard user or a specific department user, I will want to search for that user before copying. I obviously would not want to copy an admin user if I'm not wanting to create an admin user. Is there any questions on the copying functionality?
No.
Okay, the permission section, this identifies the permissions that this user has. And this is also where you can kind of manage those permissions. So I can see here the permissions that are selected for this user. I can select, unselect, so I don't have to be in an edit mode like I had to when I was looking at the user's profile. I can just select or deselect the permissions that I no longer need. If you ever have a question about what the permission does, you can select this blue question mark box, and it will bring up a box identifying what that permission allows the user to do. So this is the permissions for the general, the source, and the legacy contract, since you have that on your tool. So if you make adjustments to the user's permissions here, put your password in and save, it will change that. It will change those permissions, and it will also reflect when you are under the edit mode, where you can see the entire user's profile. So the edit shows everything on the user. It shows the user's first name, last name, contact information, the role that they're tied to, workflows that they're tied to, and all their permissions. You can also just see permissions under this section and make edits to those permissions, which will also display under the edit section after you've saved. So is there any questions on the permission section?
No.
Okay. If you have a new user, but you're not wanting to copy an existing user's profile, you can create a new user by selecting Add New User. This will take you into that template that looks like the edit user, where you can then start creating the user from scratch. So as you can see, nothing's filled out. You will have to come in and manually fill out the username, the password, verifying the password, the email, first, last name, contact information. You'll also have to identify permissions. So if you just came in and set up this first half and put your password and hit save, that user would have an account, but they would not be able to access the account because you haven't given them rights to anything. So this is where the permissions come into play. This identifies what level, access level, the user should have. You'd have to select their permissions here and then hit done. If you're noticing here, we don't see the roles that we've created. So you could just select some permissions, hit done, and then once their user's created, you could go into edit mode and then identify them to a role. But the role just is not visible here on this page when you're first creating. You can identify what bid types they should have access to, and again, the response model. So if you don't want them to have access to one of these, just deselect. Put your password in and select. So that's how to create a user from scratch. So if you have any new users, you can create them from scratch if you need to. I usually recommend copying a user over if you can, a user that has the same rights or same department. It's just easier to create a user that way. So is there any question on this users tab?
No.
Okay. So again, if you remember, if you come to tools and you're not seeing the admin section, select tools and then go to tools and admin, and it will take you back to the page that we were on. So we were just looking under users, and this is where you manage the users on your account, where you suspend a user if you needed to. You could definitely delete a user. You could edit the user's permissions. You could create users. So everything that is related to a user is here. The difference from removing a user under the user section versus the department is if you delete a user here, it deletes them from the system. If you delete a user here, it just removes them from the department. Billing address is just who is responsible for billing on your account. So we're looking at a sales environment, so this isn't one of your users. But when you're in your account and you're looking at information, look at the billing. If you wanted to display your user, your accounts payable user here, if they're a user in the system, then just select search. Search through the list of users on your account, and then select the user that should be identified. It doesn't matter if it's the basic user here or an account payable user, but if you like it to be an account payable user, then that's how you can make that change. The delivery location section is what houses all the locations that are standard delivery locations in your tool. So if you remember during implementation, we said talk to the users that create solicitations, and if they have standard delivery locations that they use the majority of the time, we can create those and have those held in the system. Otherwise, they can always add in a location as they're creating a bid. That doesn't store it in the system. It's kind of a wall. But in this case, this is where we can store delivery locations for those users to have the ability to select from. So if you're working with a user and they use a delivery location each time, and the delivery location on the account is, then they will need to talk to an admin user to come in and add a delivery location, and this is where you would add that. So you can manage your delivery locations here by searching for the delivery location. When you select the hyperlink or the link here, it will take you into the delivery location. Now you can make edits here, so I can delete and then retype the information in here if I needed to and save it. You can also view, so have a view of that. This isn't editable, so you can't make changes, but it just gives you a view in this box of the delivery location information. If you want to edit the location, you can still do that with this edit mode, which allows you to make those adjustments again and retype in the information and save it. If you wanted to edit all, you could come in here and edit the delivery location. So it basically would show you what users should have access to this delivery location. So if you wanted to do a restriction and only certain users can have access to certain delivery locations, this is kind of where you would set that up. And then you could set a department to restrict. So basically, this is a way to restrict information or not have users have access to certain delivery locations. Not very many people set this up. because usually what's in there is standard locations that they want all users to have access to. But if you wanted to restrict access for users or departments, you could do that here. If you ever need to delete a department, you can delete a department from here. This will delete it from your account, which means users would no longer have access to that delivery location when they're creating a solicitation. You would also not see it here on the tool. If you ever need to create a new location, you'll just select new location, and then you'll complete this template and hit save, and that will then hold that location in your tool. Now, if you're looking on the screen, we see that this location is lined out. What the system's done is it has validated this location to see if it really is an address. And if it's not, or if something's changed, it basically wipes it out saying, I don't think this location's good anymore. So if users are searching through the tool and they see this location, they would see that it's flagged out. And so they would know that something's wrong with this delivery location. So as an admin user, this is the way that you can also manage your delivery location. Anything that is crossed out like this, you will want to come in and view or edit to make it available. So we can see that this location didn't have a zip code, and because of that, it was not a valid location. So you'd have to come in and make the changes. Once you make the changes, then the system's saying, okay, everything's been completed. This is a valid address. So are there any questions here on how to manage the delivery locations?
No.
Okay. The default bill to location is just a way for you to identify if there is a bill to. So on your solicitations, if there's always going to be a bill to location, you can set that up here. Most users just say no default because usually the billing and all that is discussed during the contract stage, but you could default it here. Is there any questions about the delivery locations?
No.
Okay. Let me see if I can switch over to your instance again so that we can look at your direct workflow. So the next thing on the list that we're going to talk to is the bid release approval. So there's a bid release approval and a bid award approval. The bid release approval is the workflow that will take place before the solicitation goes live. So a user will create the solicitation, it will go into a holding tank until it's been approved by you, and then once it's been approved, the user can come in and release it, or the last approver could come in and release it. The bid award workflow takes place after the solicitation is closed, you've done your evaluations, and you're now ready to award. So the user can come in and say, okay, we've selected to award to this user based off of our evaluation. That goes into a workflow to just basically validate again, like, yes, this is correct. This is who we've determined to award to. So to manage your workflows, you have two options here. You have the approval rule. So that's the rule that the solicitation will follow before it's released live. And you have approval groups. Approval groups are groups of people that could be approvers within a workflow. So if we're looking at our approval rule, we'll select that link and it will take us into the workflows that are set up on the account. So we have 4 workflows in the system. One of the workflows that we have is the quick quote bid release rule. So if we select it, it will take us into the rule. So we can see that the rule is set up on bid types, but if we want to know what bid types it's set up for, we'll click that link, and whatever's checked determines what the bid type this rule is going to follow. So this means if a user creates a bid and that bid is the bid type quick quote, that bid will follow this approval rule. If you wanted to add additional bid types, you could select them and hit save, or remove, you would select them and hit save. So this is one way you can also edit the rule. We can see that once the rule hits, it will get kicked into the workflow, which in this case, we have a workflow group that consists of Fran and Claudia. We could not select a group until we've created one here in the approval group. So the group does have to be created first before we can choose from them here to approve. If we needed to add additional approvers, you're just selecting the blue circle, and it will bring up the ability for you to search through all users on the account or through additional approval groups that you've set up. So to select a user, you just select user. You could come through and search off of this data. And then once you find the user, you would just hit select and save. And that user would then show up as part of the workflow approver. So what would happen is when the rule kicks, either Fran or Claudia could approve because they're in a group, and then Richard would have to approve. To edit the rule, you would select edit. You could change the name here, and you could add different touch points. So if you wanted this to be a rule based off of something other than a bid type, then you would have to select that here. If you wanted to remove Richard, you have to click on Richard's name, and then you could delete that approver there. So I'm going to just delete him since he's not a part of our original workflow, but I just wanted to show you how easy it is to add additional users. If you had a case where the rule needs to hit to 2 people, so it needs to go to Fran and Claudia, but at the same time it needs to go to a secondary user, you could select the same thing. You could select a user, and now what would happen is the rule would hit, it would get sent out to Richard and to Claudia, and they both would have to approve before the user would get an email letting them know that their solicitation has been approved, or if there were other people in the line, they would all have to approve before it moves on to the person next in line. So again, to delete him, click on the box, select the delete approver, and everything goes back to how we have it. You need to edit the rule. Again, you'll select edit, and all this is editing is the rule that has to happen before the workflow can be released live or approved. So coming back into our approval rules, you can do that for each rule. You can come in and see how the rule's been set up. With this rule, we set it up to be a user rule, so we can see the 3 users that are going to follow this rule. If we needed to add additional users, we would just select add user, search for the user in the tool, and select them. They would then become part of this group, and that group would follow the rule, which in this case, if Ron or one of the users listed above releases a solicitation, regardless of the bid type, regardless of the amount, it's always going to go to Fran and Claudia for approval because they're the approval group. If you had to create a new user or a new group, you would click on approval group. And here we can see we have one group in the system. We can edit or delete that group. If we edit, we can come in and see who are the members of this group, the name of the group, and we can add new users into the group. So if you decide that Andre needs to become part of this approval group, you could come in and search for Andre, select his name, and he would then become part of the approval group, which would mean any one of you could approve before the solicitation went live. So that's how you create a group, or that's how you can edit a group. If you need to create a group, see if it's right stop. Oh, right here, new approval group. So it's this little link right here. You would select new approval group. you would give the group a name. I usually like to identify the users in the group if it's not very many, or maybe there's a team and they have a team like purchasing administrators, and save that. Just so as an admin user, if I ever have to come in and make changes to the group, I know what group I'm needing to make changes to. And then it's just a matter of adding users to the group. So my purchasing administration group would be Richard and Paul. I would have to save that for that group to be saved in the system. And so that group would then be held here in the purchasing admin group, and they would be available for me to select from when I'm creating a role. If I don't want that group in the system, I just go ahead and delete them, and it will delete that group. It doesn't delete the users from the system. It just deletes the group that I've created. Going back to approval rules, if you need to set up additional workflow rules in your system beyond what we've already created, then you'll select new rule here. You'll give the workflow a name. Again, make sure you're naming it something so that it's easily identified if you ever have to come in and make changes. I then have to determine what my rule is going to be. So what does the solicitation need to do for this rule to kick off? Is it a general rule, meaning it applies to everyone? Is it user-based, meaning it only applies to the users that I've identified? Is it department-based, meaning it only applies to the departments I've identified? Is it bid type, meaning it only applies to the bid types I've identified when the bid was created? Or is it an amount? So is the budget amount going to play a role in the workflow? So if it's 0 to 1,000, it's maybe going to kick off into this workflow. But if it's above 1,000, it doesn't matter. It's not going to kick into this workflow. Or opposite, anything 1,000 and above would kick off into the workflow. You can have multiple rules apply. So I've selected user, bid type, and amount filter. If you can see right now, it says incomplete, incomplete, because I haven't identified what the rule is going to follow. So if I select the users, I'm going to add the users. Again, you'll search for the users in the tool. I'm just selecting one that I find. So right now I'm saying if Richard and Brian release a solicitation for reverse auction and RFP, and if it's between 1,000 to 10,000, then this rule is going to apply. So all three of these things have to hit for this rule to apply. It has to be these two users. They have to have selected one of those bid types, and it has to be between this amount. If it does hit all those three rules, then it will follow this workflow. So I'm just going to select a person. So it would go to Paul. Then once Paul approves, it would go to an approval group, Fran and Claudia. Once they approve, it would go to maybe another user in the tool, Spencer. And then after Spencer approves, it's good to go ahead and be released. So I have a 3-step approval process. All of these have to approve before the solicitation is valid to go live. And again, the workflow is only going to hit if it hits all three of these rules. If I need to edit the rule once I've created it, it's just a matter of selecting edit. And then I have access to come in and make adjustments to my rule type and to my amount filter if I needed to do that. If I want to delete the entire string, I can just select delete, or otherwise I select the box, delete the approver. Select the box, delete the approver. I've deleted the whole string. I'm gonna close. So this isn't a workflow that we're going to be using. So over here to the right, I can delete it, and it will delete the entire workflow. Is there any questions on the bid, how to edit a workflow and how to maybe create a new workflow, or how to create a group?
No, we're good.
Okay. The same goes, the exact same way this bid release approval works is the exact same way the bid award approval works. However, this is happening at a different stage. So instead of it being when a bid is released, this is going to happen when a bid's awarded. So just make sure that you're creating and editing your workflows based on which approval that you're wanting to hit. But it works the exact same way. You can view by clicking here. You can delete. You can add in a new workflow. You can create a new group. It functions the same way. It just is hitting at different points. Is there any questions on that? Okay. The qualification isn't something that we're going to go over right now because there's going to be a qualification admin training. But this essentially is what houses all the qualifications in the tool, whether it's pre-qualification forms that are going to be selected during bid creation, whether it's a qualification to identify what a vendor holds, or whether it's a qualification that a user actually needs to approve or deny. So if you are interested in this, then attend that qualification admin training. That will show how to manage the entire qualification section. Any questions about that?
No.
Okay. So advertised bids, we're not going to cover. This is basically a way that you could create if you needed to. We're not using it, but if you had like a magazine or a newspaper that you needed to send out a notification to, you could add your advertiser here, and you could send them an email with a message. This message is standard, so it gets sent out each time. There's no way to edit or adjust the message on a per bid basis or for the advertiser. So if you're wanting to notify a newspaper every time a solicitation is going to be released, then you can add an advertiser here. However, it's the verbiage is standard. Is that something that you were wanting to use or set up?
No.
Okay. So we won't go into more detail on that, but if you ever are interested in that functionality, it's under the advertised bids. The invoice is not something really that you will have to be concerned with. If you do have an invoice account, it's documented here. We recently started using a new system for finance to manage the invoicing, and so usually your invoice will come from our finance department. You won't normally see it here in the invoice section unless the finance department has updated this section for you. The PO standard text you won't use because you're not using the purchase order section of the tool. The agency news, this is actually a great feature that you can use to post a global message on your website. So if you want all of your users to be aware about something going on within the city, or if people aren't following specific rules and you want to just put in a reminder here, whatever it might be, this is a messaging tool that you can post for the system globally. So we'll just save it and then I can show you where it posts. So once you save it, it's going to post on the home page for all users. So regardless of the user's permission or role, they will have access to view that on the home page. So right here, the message posted here. So they can see any message that you want them to be aware of. If maybe you're, the city's closed for certain hours, this is where you can post. So reminders, we will be closed on December 24th and December 25th. So this is where you as an admin user can come in and post those global messages on the site. So once I change it and save it, it will reload and we'll notice it's not there anymore. So I'm doing that under the Tools and Admin section, but it's showing up on the homepage for all users on their homepage, regardless, again, of their role or access. Even if they're a view-only user, they would see it. So that was the agency news section. Is there any questions up to this point?
No.
Okay. The bid document section is the section that houses all the standard documents. So during implementation, we were just able to do 2 forms, but once you go live and your agency support representative puts the rest of your standard documents in here, then you would see them listed all here. So this is where you as an admin can come in and view, okay, what standard documents are being held on our account, and are they the most current version? So you could click on it or download it and review it. So here we can see, here's the form. Is this still good? Is it still a valid form, or if you have to make changes? If the form you're noticing needs to make changes, so you no longer need the official company information is registered, maybe that section needs to be removed, you as an admin user do not have the rights to remove it. So what will happen is you will work directly with your support representative. You will provide them the new form through email in a Word format, and you will let them know, I need attachment A, representation and certifications removed and replaced with this new form. Your support representative will then go through and code the document to create it as a web form and attach it to your account. They will then let you know once that's been completed so that you can come in and view it. If you ever need to view documents, it's under Bid Documents, and you're just selecting the title or downloading it to view. Once you've viewed it and it looks good, then you know that it's a valid document. If it needs to have changes made, then you'll go back to your support representative and let them know what changes need to be made before it's valid. This is an important section because you want to make sure that all your documents are valid. They're the current forms, because this is where those standard documents are pulling from during the bid creation part. So any bid document here is showing up during bid creation, and that's the standard forms that your users are selecting from, which is why it's important to make sure these are the current forms. Is there any section or any questions?
Could you confirm our understanding that if something is a standard document, when that standard document is referenced in a bid, what exactly does the proposer have to do? Just open it, or do they also have to sign it, or do they also have to upload it back?
If it is a standard document, so if it's a document that's listed here under your bid document section, the user will have to complete the so the vendor will have to complete the form by typing in the document, and then they will have to put their password in, and their password basically is their electronic signature. So they'll put their password in and hit save. Once they do that, it then removes the lock on that document, and they'll have to continue to do that for all of their standard documents that have been attached to the bid. They'll have to view it, fill it out, or read over it if it's just terms and conditions, put their password in and hit save so that they are signing it electronically.
And that does that just for these types of documents.
Is view only. So there's still a lock on it, but the vendor just has to view it instead of putting in information and signing it with their password. Any document that's just uploaded during the time of bid creation is viewed as a view only document. So the vendor just has to view it. However, if it's a form that the vendor has to maybe provide information to, then they'll have to open it, view it, and maybe save it if they have to type into it, save it on their computer, and then upload it as an attachment to their bid.
Because in our directions, we could say that this specific bid document requires your to complete it and re-upload it.
Yeah, so if it's a form that is not a standard document, then you would list instructions saying, please download this form, complete it, and upload it to your offer page. But for standard documents, you don't have to do that. They'll automatically come over with the offer because the user is required to complete it and sign it.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
No.
Okay. Audit logs is where you can actually view what's happening on the account. So this is where the history of what user is tracked. You can come through the audit logs and basically see for specific bids and different things that maybe have happened in the system. So you'll select the type. What are you wanting to view a history of? Right now, you're just doing the users, contracts, bids, and workflows. You won't be using these request or purchase order features because it's not something that you're doing on your account. However, you are doing users, contracts, bids, and the workflows. So if you wanted to see what's happening on a user level, you would select user. You could select the user on the account. You could look at between dates and find, and down below it would kind of give you a history of what that user's done. Right now, Spencer hasn't done anything in the system, so we're not seeing a history for him. But this is basically where you can view those different audit logs in the tool. Let's look at so Andre, you haven't done anything either on that bid level. See if a user level brings up anything. So we're just seeing here that Andre, most likely his user was just created. But yeah, kind of the key values that you've put in, like changing the phone number format. Is that what you did?
Yeah, and I corrected somebody's last name.
Yeah. So if you see here, this is the previous value and this is the new value. So we can see that this is what the phone number looks like and this is what Andre changed it to. This is what the last name looks like and this is what we changed it to. So you have that history. We can also see when it happened. So that's a great feature if you're wanting on your users. So if a change was made and it's like, who made this change? You can come in and do these different audit logs to see what happened. CD archives is not going to be used. I'm going to see if I can pull that off your account since you're not using it. And then the default bid section. Look in there. So on a bid, you can have specific information show up every time, kind of like a warning or a message that will show up on the solicitation for the vendors. So it could be something like, please contact BidSync support at 800-990-9339, option 1, option 2, for support questions on how to submit your offer. This would then default on every solicitation. That message would default on every solicitation a user creates. So it's a way to post a default message on a solicitation level for vendors to see. So is there any questions with that?
With the bid default, could we put just some basic formatted text in there? Like if we need to change the date, we can change the date?
Are you talking about the date of a solicitation or what are you talking about?
Well, maybe I shouldn't have used the word date, but maybe there was like some formatted text that we put in there that says, I don't know. It just has text in there because it's default. It's not locked, right?
Yeah.
This comes up. It's the default language. and then the agent who's preparing the bid, before they release it, they could adjust this text, right?
No. So the user that is creating the solicitation cannot adjust the text. Only an admin user could adjust it here because it puts it as standard text that cannot be edited by a user. An admin user can only edit it, and they can only edit it in this section. However, this is defaulted for every bid, so it's system-wide, which means you can't change it on a per bid basis. A user could do that in the bid description section when they're creating a bid. They have access to put in their own freeform text for bid description, but this is a default system-wide text that's going to be posted on every single solicitation.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, any questions with this section?
No.
Okay, so the last 15 minutes, I want to talk about workflow approval, how to do that. So during the bid creation process, we'll talk about this during the end user training, but when a user creates a bid, let me move over to my sales environment. When a user creates a solicitation, that solicitation, after it's created, does not get released live. It moves to a holding tank where the user will have to kick it into a workflow by selecting the box and then select ready for approval. That will then kick it into the system, and the system will then identify, okay, what workflow is this supposed to go to? So you'll see right now that there's a bunch of workflows that have check marks, and then there's some that has no box that says approval pending. What this basically means is these ones with check marks have gone through a workflow process and have been approved, and they're now ready for the user to release it. The ones that say approval pending and do not have a box means that this was kicked into a workflow, but it has not been fully approved yet. So the user can't do anything. They can't release it live, and they can't kick it into a workflow because it's still in a process of being approved. If you need to see what's happening with the workflow, you'll select the title of the solicitation, and there's a section that says approval, which is housing the workflow information for this solicitation only. So I can see the workflow is pending. If I want to see where it's pending at, I'll select view approval flow, and it will show me that we're waiting on Cherie Anderson, so in my sales environment. So I can see that this is the person that submitted the workflow. It then went to Tanya for approval, and she approved, and it's been pending on Cherie for 4 weeks. So this kind of gives you a history of what's happening with the workflow and why it's held up. You can also view the workflow history here. So you can kind of see who the requester was, who approved it on the date that they approved, and who it's waiting on. If any of these users have submitted comments with their approval, we'd be able to see the comments here. But we basically see that this isn't live yet because Cherie hasn't approved it. So then we would have to go to Cherie and say, Cherie, this workflow's been waiting for you. You need to go and approve it. And it's for this solicitation and this title. Going back to that page we were just on, I was under the source page and the holding tank, so the held bid section. You can do that with any solicitation, even a solicitation that's ready for approval. You can select it. We can see that it's approved. We can view the approval flow here. We can see that this one didn't go through a workflow. We can also view the workflow history. So in this case, this one didn't hit a workflow, so that's why it was automatically approved. We can see that Deborah submitted it on May 2nd, and that's when it was approved to then be released.
Going back to that workflow transaction that, waiting for someone to approve it for a period of time.
Yeah.
If that person is not available, is there anything that admin can do to tell the system that this is now approved?
If you are a super approver for an admin workflow, then yes, you could go in and approve it yourself. Or you would have to do the delegation to delegate so that you could go in and approve on behalf of Deborah if she was out. But a super user workflow approver would have the ability to come in and override and approve on behalf.
All right, thank you.
Does that help? Okay.
Yes.
If you are a workflow approver, you do get an email notification letting you know that a workflow has been submitted and is waiting for you to approve. So the user does get a notification letting them know that it's their turn. They also will see on their home page that bids here are waiting for them to approve. So it's not like they just have to come in and log into the system and see like, okay, is there a workflow for me to approve? They will receive an email notification. But once it's their turn, they'll get an email notification. They could then come to the website, log in, because they have to be logged in to approve. So it's validating who they are. Select that link on the home page. So I might have done that too fast, so we'll go back. Select this link under bids awaiting release approval. Select on that. I can come in as an approver and I can see the bid details. So I'll want to review the bid detail information. I'll want to scroll down and review the description on the solicitation and view the documents that they've added. If I need to make any changes as an approver, I can revise the solicitation here. So let's say that I've noticed that something's wrong. I can either decline it and tell the user to fix it, or I can come in and fix it as an approver. So I can say, oh, the bid duration date's wrong. It's supposed to be closing at 11:30, not 10:30. So I can make that change and save it. Go back to my home page. So I could see now that I made the change from 10:30 to 11:30, so that saved change, so that looks good. So once they review everything, they can click on View Approval Flow. And if you see, we're looking in a string for the workflow. So this is everybody that needs to approve before it can go live. With this approval, it actually is hitting two people at the same time. It's hitting me, I'm logged in as Mark Buchanan, and Paul, and we can see that it's pending for both of us. So I just released this into the workflow today, so we're showing that there's only 0 days, meaning I'm not over yet. As Mark, I can come in and either approve and say, leave a comment, this has been approved. I fixed the closing time, or I could deny it and I could say the closing time is wrong, needs to be changed from 10:30 to 11:30, and then put my password in and submit, which would then send it back to the creator to tell them that they need to make that change and then resubmit it back into the workflow. If I approve it, then I'll put my password in, hit submit, and that will then show that my user has approved it. So now we're waiting on Paul to approve before it will kick off to our group with Donna and Mary, and then our last person, Tanya. Now if I go to home, we'll see that that section's gone. It disappeared because I've taken care of all workflows that are attached to my user. However, if I wanted to just go in and check on it, I could come to the source and view bids. And I could find that solicitation right here. It was this freight 123 freight. So I can see that it's still the pending approval, meaning not everybody has approved. and there's no boxes there, which means that it hasn't been fully approved to be released. But if I click on the title, I can then come back into this workflow to see where it's at again in the workflow. If I look at the history of the workflow so far, we can see that I approved it, and here's my comment that I made. Again, an approver has two places where they can make a change. They can either revise straight inside of the bid details, or they can revise from the source view bid. Make sure they're under held bid section, because this is before it's gone live. They can find the solicitation and they can revise here and save as well. So there's really two places that you can make revisions. Sometimes it's easier just to make it inside for a workflow approver, because they're in this section anyways, because they have to click here to come in and view the approval. You can see that I no longer have access to approve or deny because I've already taken care of my steps. So I can't approve or deny for Paul because I'm not a full system admin approver on a workflow. I've just been given the right to approve my step on this solicitation. So is there any questions on that?
No.
Okay, so Fran and Claudia, you're basically the approvers on the account. So going forward, if somebody kicks one into a workflow, you'll get an email notification, but you could also come to your home tab, click on the link like I did, and it will direct you straight into the workflow. Or you could go to source, view bids, make sure you're under held bid section. You could search for the bid by title or bid number. You'll then click inside of the solicitation. You'll come to that view approval workflow here. You can even go down into the line item level and view the line items. You can click on each line item to view the details. And then once you have done that, you'll click View Approval Flow, and then you'll see Approve or Deny over on this area with the comment section. Put your password in and hit Save based on your answer. So it's fairly simple. It's just knowing where to access that approval flow. That is just for a bid award. Or for a bid release. For a bid award, it will be held under the under source, view bids, and to be awarded bids if you want to get to it directly. So once a user selects award, they'll be able to kick it into a workflow from here. So this is how they would kick it into a workflow if a workflow was attached to it. So there would be a second step. So they would hit award, and then there'd be a second step for approval. So you could come there and approve. But the easiest way to approve for any workflow is to just click on the link on your home page. Then it will direct you directly to where you need to go. And you're not having to sort through these different view bids, whether it's a held bid or an awarded bid. So your best bet is going to be to come to home and to click on that link like I did that first time. Is there any questions?
Sounds good.
Okay. With our 3 minutes left, I want to tell you about the support site that we have. And I think, Andre, I may have already told you about this, but there's a website that houses all of our user guides. There's even some video tutorials on there, and I think even recorded webinars. but you will come in and go to support.bidsync.com, and I'll send you an email with this direct link. But you'll go to support.bidsync.com. You'll have to create a login because the login is separate from your BidSync login. So you'll select sign in, and then right here you'll say sign up. Once you've signed up, you'll be able to log in with your username and password and sign into the tool. And then this is where you can search for those different packets. So if I wanted to search for all the user workflows regarding workflow, I could just type in workflow, and here's a user guide that comes up. So if I select approving a workflow, it then gives me instructions for how to approve a workflow in the system. And there's user guides for all of that. So you could just type in admin and see what comes up. So here's an admin training video you could use. And there's different things like that in the tool that you could come in and search for. If you're really searching for something specific, type in that. So admin users, to try to get something on how do I maybe update users or adding a user to your account. So here's a good user guide for how you would add a user to your account. So there's different user guides like that that will help you. I will provide you this recording. So if you ever need to listen to this recording to learn how to manage the admin section on your account, you'll have this. But this support portal is a really good place to access information as well. So before we close the admin training, are there any questions?
No.
Yeah.
Okay. If there are any questions, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll get those addressed for you. You all should have access to the training website. Have you tried logging in?
Oh, yes.
The training? Okay. So go to the training website today and go to the tools and admin section and practice what we've learned today. So practice adding a user, practice editing a user, practice setting up a workflow. So practice doing all those things in your training account so that you're not affecting your production account. Trainings where you'll want to go and test everything you've learned today.
Okay.
Okay. I will be sending this training recording to you through Dropbox. And so Andre, Claudia, and Fran, I will invite you both to the recording so that you can download it and then save it on a shared drive. But because it's so large, it won't send through email. So you look for a Dropbox notification today of this recording, and then you should have it by the end of today.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Have a nice rest of your day. And if there are any questions, please reach out.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
All right, bye-bye.